Hi, welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. My name is Matt Lehman, and this is a stream all about building Django apps. And we're going to continue on the homeschool application that I've been building this evening. So hopefully you'll stick around as we work on some modeling changes and adding a new concept to a model that it didn't previously have. Before we do that, I want to thank those who support me on Patreon. So if you would like to support me as well, you're welcome to do so at patreon.com/mblehman. But I want to shout out to Rupert, Andrew, Dragos, Patrick, Eric, Philip, Miguel, and Peter. Thank you for contributing and supporting me. You can help me out if you can't support me financially by commenting, liking, subscribing, doing all of those kind of things that make YouTube happy, so that this content can be discovered by others. So without that out of the way, let's get into what we're working on tonight. Last time I streamed on the homeschool application, I was talking about this concept of field trips in the app. It was something that has been requested by multiple customers, and I'm trying to figure out a way to model it in the app today using existing models that I have. One of the models in the system is the notion of a school break, and a break is a generic name basically for a field trip in most circumstances. So I'm thinking of using the school break model as the way to do field trips. And I want to use that because the scheduling logic is pretty hard. I don't want to throw in another category of logic to consider to make that calculation. So if I can avoid adding something else into the mix, that should be helpful. So the plan is to make the school break look appropriate for field trips, and there's some changes that have to go in to make that work. So you're free to ask me anything about Python, Django, or web development. That's what I'm here for. But otherwise, we'll be focusing on this particular project as a lens to see how to build software as a service applications. So let's look at some code and talk about a little bit about what we're doing here. And I just realized I might have some stuff that I need to clear out, so I'm going to put this on secret mode for just a minute. There's nothing too crazy in there, thankfully. And that was the example file. So apologies for making that not clear from the get-go, but I had an open terminal from something else. So let's just open up to a random file and open that back up. Okay, so let's talk about what we need to change. The school break model, which I should have probably opened straight to that thing. The school break model is in this models file, and it represents a time range for when a student is off of school. And this is important because the way that the schedule is built, it fills in all of the slots. And so you can't have, if you have someone taking the day off and you don't have any way to represent a gap in that, then the scheduling tool is not going to fill that in correctly. The challenge with adding field trips, and the reason why this is something that we have to modify, is that field trips can be for an individual user, an individual student. So we have to extend the school break to capture that idea that school breaks can be for a student. So I've been thinking about how I want to do this, and I think I actually have another issue with some of the details. Yeah, here we go. So we talked about different ways to model this in a previous stream, and one way would be to add a foreign key to a student directly on a school break and have multiple that way. And as I thought about this, I thought, like, well, that actually has some limitations. There's some good things about it, but you'd have to have multiple for each one, and then yada yada. It just gets a little messy. So the other option is to model this as a many-to-many relationship, where you have a school break that represents the range, and then you would add in the students that it applies to. And this is a more normalized way to do it. There's fewer records to create, I guess, perhaps. And I think I'm leaning this way. So we need to modify the interfaces that use the school break, though, before we can actually connect this all together. Because what I don't want to have to do is modify the data and then not have the tools in place to actually make the code work. So I think what I want to do with this particular stream is the areas that actually use the school break, modify those APIs so that they consider a student and anticipate that change. And then ultimately, we can modify the data under the covers to actually then use that new API. So that's going to mean looking at some certain interfaces and adding the student as a parameter to those methods. And that'll be a little bit more clear as we get into the code. So let's do that. So I'm going to jot down the goal over here. The goal is to get students into the school break APIs. And I'm not going to walk through the model diagram, so some of you may never have seen that before. And if you're new, just letting you know that like this is a homeschool application. It's meant for schools and single families and stuff that are running their kids through homeschool, which my family happens to be one of those. My own spouse is a customer here, so this is what I'm building it for, in case you're curious. All right, let's look over at the code. The primary method that I think I have to modify is in the school itself, if I recall correctly, or the school year. It might be more specific, and that is this method right here, the isBreak method. So the way this works is the scheduling logic does this calculation that has to figure out which days are break days and which days are not. And it does that by passing in a break date. So this is a date object, and does this lookup of can it find the break? Can it find the break? And that if you go one more method deep, you can see that there's this dictionary of school breaks by date. And where does that come from? Well, the school breaks by date is this private property. It's a cache property, and it does a lookup on this stuff and computes this dictionary. And so it collects all of the breaks for the school year. This is the current logic. It collects all of the breaks for the school year and figures out, okay, these breaks are not, I designed this specifically so that breaks can represent time ranges and not just individual dates. That was important from my customer's point of view. They didn't want to have to like create a break for each day. That would be super annoying. So each break can be thought of as like a collection of dates. And so this loop that goes through here looks at the school break and does this comparison and adds it to this dictionary. And that dictionary says whether a thing is a break or not. It's a Boolean kind of operation. And actually puts the break itself in the dictionary. So it can check out more specifics about it, like if it's got a description or not. Sometimes that gets used. But the Boolean check here just says, hey, are you a break or not? And so what we need to do, and this is where it's going to explode on us, is we need to add a student. And this is the API change. And you can see already, or you may not be familiar with my editor setup, I don't blame you, but I have some lint checking tools that will highlight in the gutter, so the left side of my editor, if something is wrong. So it immediately detected that I've added a new parameter, and the spot where I'm using isBreak is suddenly broken. In fact, how many calls to isBreak are there? There are a bunch. So these spots where I'm using isBreak is not good. So I think what I want to do to start is assume, well, I guess first we should probably validate. I need to validate that I actually have the student and the spots where I call these things. Otherwise, there's going to be some other kinds of problems that we have to get through, and perhaps I should like go through them and enumerate. Melissa, sorry if I'm butchering your handle there. Let me read your question and see what you're asking. Best way of doing a date range. I literally did, so it's kind of there's multiple ways to answer your question. I modeled it with truly like start date and end date. So exactly like you're talking about, 2 columns, 1 for the end. I think there are Postgres specific features for date ranges. I could be wrong on that. So if we look up Django Postgres fields, so if you happen to be using the Postgres database, then some of these fields might be useful. Like, and I could be wrong on this too. Something struck me in the head that like this is something that is possible. So there was that array field, and maybe that's what I had in mind is like perhaps you could have an array field that has a bunch of dates. I know I'm scrolling through this really fast, so I apologize if it's like really hard to read or jarring. Oh, here it is. No, I was right. So there's a date range field. So you could represent this as a date range. I probably should have done this, maybe, because I know I'm using Postgres, but I opted not to. So that's another pattern that you could pick to make your models represent that. And that would probably be a single column. I don't know, I can't speak to how date range is represented under the covers inside of Postgres. I imagine it's more efficient by using this kind of range. It's not the pattern I selected. I think I did that at the time. When I'm doing my app development locally, this sounds kind of dumb, but I use SQLite. And so knowing that Postgres kind of functionality wasn't available and I didn't need it right then, I opted for something that I thought was simpler. That was my choice. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so we need to come to this is break stuff and figure out in these contexts where it's used, is there actually a student available? That's kind of step one. So I can tell you this enrollment that's passed in, I can tell you that contains a student. So that is a spot where the student is available. So that one's good. And it looks like it's called twice here. So that's all good. We've got this models, which we know we have to update. And we have a forecaster, which has the student. So that area is good. And then what's on these core views? The core views should have a student as well. I'd be surprised if it doesn't. Oh no. All right, so there might be little spots here that we have to think about this a little differently. Daily context. Shoot. This one has the school year. See, the problem with this approach is that I did not design this model to consider students. Like, there's going to be some other problems that are going to shake out. Like, think about a create page. Like, now that if I'm saying you have to have a student, perhaps have a student, then what is that page going to look like? How is that going to change in its design? If I model this with a many-to-many field, it's possible that I could create a school break and not have any many-to-many relationships to it, and that could represent a school break that applies to all students. So the absence of the connection could be something that I leverage, and may actually be a way to transition this. Because the other thing that I'm thinking through with this is that this school break model is live in production. Just jot that note there for others. So it means that whatever I do, I have to think about it as like there are school breaks in the database today that real customers are using that I need to modify in such a way that I don't break their workflow. So that's always a challenge. Once you have a live database where you're no longer just adjusting for an app that doesn't have actual people. I've got real customers, and they're paying customers too. They're not fake free customers or anything like that. Some of them are family that have an arrangement with me that they don't have to pay. But there are actual people that are paying for the service. So it means I have an obligation to them to make sure that their features continue to work. So looking at this, we've got to come up with a solution for this core thing that doesn't seem to have a student. And maybe I need to, before I modify the API, I need to back up and say like, okay, what else should we consider? Like maybe that is break method, for instance, should think about having an optional student. Let's walk through that thought exercise. Yeah. What would that look like? So what I mean by optional in Python, I'm talking about like type syntax here. So this would be like optional, and then the model name is student. And if you are not as familiar with Python type annotation stuff, this means it's equivalent to a student or none. In fact, with Python 3, so here's a I don't, and you can see I've got an example of optional here with the school break model. Something in Python 3.10 that's coming out, I believe, is you could conceivably rewrite this type annotation of optional school break to be like school break or none. I think that's what they're doing, using the pipe operator, the logical or. That's an upcoming change. That'll be cool. That's an aside for type annotation stuff. But the point is, the fact that you can have a none or a student might affect the API here, and is something we perhaps should consider as a way to get out of this circumstance where what do you do when you don't have a student? And that's legit. Like there's times, now that I'm saying this out loud, there are times where that's going to be the case. Let's look at the app and present that with clarity. Whoops. I need to turn on my virtual environment. So let's fire up the application and come over here and go to port 5000 and log in. I think this is the username. Okay, cool. So what is a context where a school break doesn't care about the student? Well, here's an example right here, the calendar. So this calendar extends, this is a new school year that I've created, and it's apparently started in May, back when I created this thing, but let's add a break. So let's add a break to, let's say, 8/26/2021, and we'll do 8/26/2021. We don't need to give a description. So here it is. Here it is on the calendar, showing up as 26th. It doesn't matter that it's for a particular student or not. In fact, I talked to my spouse about this, and there are going to be times where it's just like, well, a break is a break, and whether it's a field trip or a break for my son or a break for my daughter, it's like it's going to need to show up on the calendar as there's some kind of break happening on that day. So I think that informs the API here that we need to be able to say that this is optional. And well, now that I'm saying this, now that I'm writing this out, it's a question of, do I want to make it so that it has to be supplied? Like, what if I took this back off? So we make it look like an actual positional thing, but accept that the type of this could be an optional student. So that's just a way of saying it is required. Should I make it required as a parameter, but then be optional? I'm not sure I like that. I think I'd rather have it be equal none. Now the challenge is that I now have to be careful with this approach, because it's possible now that I've made this in such a way that all of those existing isBreak calls are technically correct as is. The student equal none method here is literally doing nothing. So what's the other way to think about this, right? Well, there are many other ways. The one other way to think about this is, what if we made this a keyword only argument? And can we do this like this? I think that works. So maybe you've never seen the syntax before, and I think I got that right. Let's Python 3 keyword word only arguments. I don't know if the pep had it like really quickly available. Yeah, okay. So a keyword only argument is kind of a cool feature that came in Python 3, and it allows your method to, like, if we've got I won't put this, I was about to type this in the chat. It's probably not the best place for it. Let's do it from the code. Let's just make up something. So we want to call something called my method or my function. if it's more like a function. And if it's taking a keyword only argument, it means that you must supply it as a keyword argument. So you can't say, if it was, say, on like the first position, then, or the second argument, I should say, you'd have to supply it like this. And in this example, b equal to, that was a terrible example. I apologize for how crummy that is with the naming. Would be a keyword only argument. So if I was to write out the function signature for my function, it would look like my function with a and then the star. Star is what separates the keyword only arguments, and then you'd have b here, and so that, and then you'd have the rest of the function. And so that is how that would work. So this has the nice effect of making it so that whenever I'd call isBreak, I would have to supply a student, but I might like say student equal none. So that's kind of the difference. Yeah, I think I'm kind of with you, Rafiskar. Like it does feel like a way to signal, hey, this is important. It needs to be here most of the time. And if you want to opt out of it, you can, but by passing in none. So the other thing I'm going to do, I think, is add the type signature to this. And I think this will be valuable for other reasons. So I don't know how many of you have used MyPy. So I use MyPy at work. There are good and bad sides to MyPy, but MyPy, if you're not familiar with it, it's a type checker. So Python has optional type checks that you can add. And this getBreak is one of those examples. It has, that's what that arrow is here. It's what the optional school break is. And I'm realizing that this signature is not even complete. I'm only specifying the returns. It's not even a good one here. It's probably a bad example. So what I should be saying is that this is a date. I probably don't have that imported that way though. All right, date time. So we have to say it's a datetime.date. So that specifies the arguments type, and the arrow indicates the return type. My primary reason for using the type checker is for optional. And the reason that I use MyPy for optional is because it tells me, it can statically analyze my code and find when I'm not handling none. I'm sure you all have seen, like if I launch Python here and we say, we'll call a variable none. So we're just going to set a variable n, and then we're going to say foo and call it like a method. So this is a super common error. It's either, so none type has no attribute foo. So it's just an example of things that can happen in, this is the null pointer exception in Java. This is, I can't remember what it is in Ruby. It's something with nil. Any language that has this concept of none or null can suffer from this problem of saying like, well, you didn't handle the case where none could be an option. So if I've got the method signature here and I change the signature so that it includes the type information, then MyPy can do the checking, and it checks any call that uses isBreak, and it's looking, is none ever passed in? Or maybe better stated, does the code in here handle the case where something is none? And so that's a good sanity check to make sure it catches you from those none type exceptions. So let's do that. Let's modify this to give the type signature here. I'm kind of sold on this this type signature, and we're going to add in optional. I don't think I have the student model imported, unfortunately. So we're going to have to bring that one in. Yeah, that's too bad. And that might be a type checking one. We'll try this. We'll see if it works okay, or if it causes a circular dependency. It might. Actually, we can figure that out now. So the student model is defined in the student's app. And this is going to be a problem if this models file or any of the ones that it imports also imports schools, because it'll create a cycle. And that's some of the challenge with type checks is that, like, and very frankly, boundary crossing between packages, is that sometimes you have to import these things in order to get the benefit, and then it can cause some import cycles. And so the way around that is with this gnarly if type checking thing that makes it like runtime doesn't do this. It's kind of a mess. It's not my favorite part about the type checking system, but it is the way to get that safety check. So let's assume for a moment that we actually can get the student model, and we're going to import it. Let me finish off the type signature first. So we want optional school break is the thing that it's going to return currently. So we want to put all that in there. And then what is it complaining about? Oh, no, it's a bool. Yep, okay, got this answer wrong. So it's a bool. It's a simpler type return. And this should have been a date. I'm getting stuff wrong all over the place. The type checking thing is not, it's actually, so the answer is neither. It's not a custom solution and it's not a MyPy thing. It's actually in the typing module. So the standard library, let's go to the docs.python.org and go to the library reference and go look for typing. And you can actually find it in here somewhere. Okay. So here's the definition: a special constant that is assumed true by third-party type checkers. So MyPy is the thing that uses it, but it is part of the typing module, which is part of the standard library. So the impact is that at runtime, the time when you're actually running this code, this is going to evaluate to false. So if you have a cycle, an import cycle, you can use this type checking to kind of break that cycle. That's and what I mean by cycle is module A imports something from module B, and module B imports something from module A, and it creates a loop. That doesn't work because of the way Python evaluates modules. It can't resolve all of the symbols in the symbol table, and so you have to have a full directed graph, and so you have to be able to break some of these things. And that's why you sometimes see like weird stuff of people like doing imports inside of methods and functions. Usually that's to break import cycles. This is what type checking is for, though. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so let's do this. We're going to try importing the student model. So we're going to say, oops, not there, from homeschool students models, import student. And then what's going on? Oh, it's still detecting that I have this other stuff. So for now, if we run the test suite, I do expect either two things will happen. One, it will just see, okay, we'll either see a big explosion. We would have seen Fs all over the place. I mean, like every test would have failed because imports would have failed. Or we're seeing what I more likely expected, which is that the isBreak is like seriously used in a lot of places. It's like a pretty core API to a lot of scheduling. And so all of this handful of places that we looked at that used it get called a lot, just not in ways that you might expect. So there were a bunch of tests. So out of the suite of 500, 40 of them failed. So about 10%. So we've got some work to do. And I think the thing to do now is just before we actually use any of this. So I want to put a to-do comment here that we have to do something with student. So use the student parameter. Yeah, parameter. I said it like that because there's actually a semantic or naming distinction between an argument versus a parameter. This is like deep programming nerd stuff, but it's fun. I think it's interesting anyway. An argument is the name of the thing that you pass in when you call a function or method. So, like as in foo a b, that a and b in that example is the argument. The flip side of this, and this is why it gets confusing, is that when you have the definition of foo a b, that's when it is called a parameter, like that. So a little bit of nerd trivia for you. So we're considering the student parameter. So my test suite has 100% test coverage. So if we fix all of these isBreak calls that we found, every line should be touched. And so anyone that I've got wrong right now will explode somewhere, because we've created a new parameter, keyword only argument. That's where it gets super weird. Python has a different name for it. And we need to correct those methods. So let's go into the core view. I think was this the one that actually doesn't have, yeah, this is the one where we don't have the student available to us. So at the isBreak part, we now need to say student equal none. And that should fix that. And then there's another isBreak call here. I was curious. There's a schedules for each student. Huh. This might actually need to be have the student. All right, I'm going to put a to-do by this one. Check on this, because I'm not convinced that what I'm about to do is going to be right. We'll do it for now, because I don't know any better. So we're passing in student equals none there. And then continuing along, we have the student. We say student equals student, because we have that as a parameter in this method. And man, this just shows up all over the place, doesn't it? It's a pretty big change to the model in some ways. The other thing I don't know is what? In this context, what do I not know? Do we already have the student fetched? Because what I'm doing right now is it may be, since I'm accessing it off this enrollment, this is actually, the student is a foreign key on this particular model. So I want to put a to-do here to check, because if I don't, the way this is executing, this might do more queries than I want to. Check that enrollment is doing a select related. Okay, so we're creating some work to come back and clean up and things to check on, but it's kind of a necessary thing here. And we've got test is break. For now, we will put student in here as none. This should also do, we should write a new test. So let's mark that as a pass for the moment. And another to do. All the kinds of cleanup that will will be necessary. So we've got that is break check and that one. This is a template thing, so that's not an issue. Those are the templates. All right, let's see how we did. With any luck, we have cleaned up the spots that call is break, and oh, maybe we missed one. This shouldn't have, like, if we did this right, there shouldn't be any problem with this because we're passing in this argument that's doing nothing, but clearly we missed something. Missed one. Where did I miss this one? This is in the schools models file. How did I miss that? What in the world? I don't see it. I see the views. What the heck? Well, that's super weird. Where is it breaking? Get task count in range. Is break. Why is my search tool not finding that? That's unnerving. I don't know why ripgrep didn't find that. And it was in the main file. What the heck? This is bothersome. Now it's finding it? Come on, ripgrep. Not cool. All right, let's correct these two and then get back to it. I'm gonna just ignore the fact that my search tool didn't find everything. That's terrifying. As someone who really depends on that. Yeah, I also have been mindlessly just adding student equals none when that may not be right. Shoot. All right, let's go review this one more time. Because now this matters, because this next course day bit, presumably it's the next course day for a student. So like it may mean that maybe student needs to be passed into here and that it's not ready. Hey Shevens93, welcome back. We're working on making some API changes to make my school break and my system accommodate students. I did, man. I couldn't, I tried, like I said, I think I said this on Twitter, but I tried to like dark mode and dark themes on my editor, and I just couldn't. I had to give up. All right, let's get back to this is break thing one more time. Let's review this, and now I have to like really think and not just go into mindless mode here to make sure that is there going to be a student that is affected by this. So thankfully this context has a student, so I'm not worried about this one. It's either we just have to do a performance check on that. This one also has the student, so that's good. It's whenever we can supply the student, that is when I'm feeling good about this. This is the definition, so that one's not the problem. Okay, so when is get task count in range used? And if it's used in the calculation of a student's schedule, then we would need to get the student in there too. I think it is, unfortunately. So I'm going to be creating a bunch of things that I'm going to have to come back to a little later, and we'll probably do maybe a couple of them as an example for this evening, but I'm not going to make y'all suffer through like all of my to-dos that I want to work on. Is student needed? That's the question we want to ask. Oh, shoot. Okay. And I think this is the same kind of story. So let's put the same comment. Okay. I know that it's not needed for these basic tests because this test is deliberately checking the case where it's just checking is break. And then we're going to have a test that does the proper filtering later. So those are okay. This test should be okay. And what is this one? This is the context for the day. I think this is okay. So we have a daily page. If I bring up the site again, there's a day page and a week view, and those are what those core things do. So this week and day are both implemented by the core Django app because they're pretty foundational. And so here's the week view. Here's an example of a break. No, that's the current day. This is the one that we just added earlier. Is this break right here? This is where it doesn't matter if it's the student or not. It needs to show up. Oh, shoot. I said that and then convinced myself otherwise. It does matter because look, like here are my kids, Mark and Faye, and the break could apply to one of them and not the other. Dang it. All right. It matters. Sad. Okay. This matters per student. Man, I got a bunch of work to do. Yep, same with this one. This is another, what view is this? This is the daily view. It's the same problem because the daily view has, it's just a time slice into a particular day of the week. So we can look at, here's the 18th. If we jump ahead, we go to the 26th is the one. And yeah, it may matter. Like this is a break day marked for this day, but it might be just a break day for one kid. So that has to be plumbed through too. All right. Now, I think generally there might be a one or two to-dos in here, but generally with my app, I don't leave to-dos in there. So if we search for to-do, we should get the list of things that we just added for the most part. Yeah, that's not 100% true, but hey, what can you do? So I think what we need to do is go back and check on these various bits and see what we can do to get additional information in there. I have a feeling that this is going to be kind of a cascading problem. And it's going to be cascading for a lot of reasons. One of the primary reasons is there is no guarantee that a user even has students. When some of these pages are viewed, it's possible to view this page without having created a student yet, I'm pretty sure. And so that's going to create some like challenges of what kind of conditions do we want to do? Like, are there error states that we want to send people to a certain page before they can even see this page to like say, hey, you need to have a student here. Now, as I'm saying that out loud, I might actually be wrong about some of these files. Like I did some extra stuff. Yep. So like I said, hey, it's not worth showing you some of these things until you have students. So the daily view is actually okay. Yeah, thanks. That is a hairy problem. It's one that it's going to be a good feature once I get it out there. Shivans, your question about 404s. What 404s are you referring to specifically? Maybe you have something specific in mind. This page is like the student doesn't have to be a critical element of this one. Although this one might be a bad example, as I said, because I have already designed the template so that it has logic that checks do you have students or not. But some of these pages that may or may not work when students are there, those are like the edge cases. Like we have to put some guards on these views because I don't want the user to be like stuck in the spot where they didn't know they needed a student in order to do some work. For example, let's say you're a brand new user and the way the app works, I can't even show it to you because I never hide it. But as soon as you sign up for the service, you end up at this page, and it walks you through creating a school year, a grade level, a course, and a task. These are all like the tree of things that are necessary to kind of build out your schedule. After you complete each one of these steps in this little wizard, you end up on this page, and you have at minimum a grade level, a course, and a single task in it. And it's just enough to get you started and be like, okay, I can do this. At this point, I think it is completely realistic for somebody to click this button to add a break. And what do we want to have happen there? Or I mean, you all can have input, I'm sure. What do I need to have happen, I guess, as the one who has to maintain this thing? That's the stuff that I want to be careful of, is like, don't want to stop people from doing the things that they want to do just because they haven't put enough data in there yet. And sometimes that might be like hints of here's where you need to go next, or you're not ready to do this yet because, but I really want to kind of hold their hands. And the selling point, like the way I pitch this entire app is all about like simplicity. And if I can't nail simplicity, if I can't put in the polish to make the app feel as simple as possible, then I really feel like I'm failing. All right, so let's there's no better way to do this than just to go through them and start checking them off. All right, let's start with this one because I think it's probably going to be the easiest. So this is a method here, and as I said, this enrollment is what the enrollment does is it connects together the student and what grade they're going to be part of for that school year. So the enrollment has two attributes on it, or two foreign keys. One is to a student record and one is to a grade level. You can see the grade level already being used here, so I know I'm fairly confident that the grade level has been selected already in the query, because knowing myself, I don't like skip over those kind of things typically. What am I using on Vim to collate all my to-dos? Are you talking about down here at the bottom? If that's what you're referring to, this is just me using ripgrep, my search tool, and searching for the phrase to do. And then this bottom window in Vim is called the quick fix list, and my ripgrep plugin will populate that list, and it brings it up as like an extra pane at the bottom, and you can open and close quick fix, and there's probably, and in fact you can see it's right below the number 10 there. It says quick fix list. Greenfork GF, welcome. Hello. Working on a homeschool app. I don't know if I've seen your handle before. So trying to add a new feature to a model that is pretty core to the app and discovering that it has a bunch of changes. But Shivans, you should, let's see, let's check it out. Is quick fix, we do that with the help? Yeah, there you go. So you can learn all about the quick fix list. It's a good way for populating a bunch of stuff. And if you use the ripgrep plugin, it's really useful. There are some really cool things that you can do. I love Vim in some ways. Like I have a plugin, for example, that let's say I wanted to change all of these to-dos. So this quick fix list itself is with one of the plugins that I've added, it acts as like a buffer. And so I could change all of these to-dos here to be to don'ts. I don't know, I'm being dumb. Whatever, you know, and I could change them all. And I'm not going to do this, but I could hit save now on this buffer, and it would actually go out into all of those individual files and save them separately. So it's kind of like it's like a really sort of advanced find and replace, because you have the full power of the Vim editor here to do as you will. Anyway, that's an aside though. And okay, so we've got this this section of to-dos. What was the command again? So the command I'm using is ripgrep. All right, Vim detour. And apologies for those of you that aren't VS Code users. So let's do a vsplit, and I won't spend too long on this because not everybody's a Vim user. So I'm looking at my Vim RC right now, and the plugin to do that searching within my project is this one right here. It's from JRemM. It's vim ripgrep, and then I've got my ripgrep command here that searches through stuff to kind of customize this a little bit. My dot files are available on GitHub, so github.com/mblehman/dotfiles, and you can find my vimrc. So this is the plugin that you would install, and then I've mapped this to a leader command. And so what I do to launch ripgrep is I hit spacebar A. So my leader command on my editor is the spacebar. That allows me to do shortcuts very quickly. It works because Vim, since it's a modal editor, I'm not in editing mode all the time. It means that the biggest key on my keyboard is available for quick use. So I hit spacebar A, and you can look at the bottom of my window and see that RG space popped up here. And that's what this no remap does. I'm literally saying whenever I hit leader A, so spacebar A, populate the EX command area with RG, and that dash is a space character because I have my editor set up to show trailing spaces. And so what that does is it gets me well positioned to like type in whatever I want. So I can hit to do and then hit enter, and then it populates my quick fix list with any instance that it can find of to do. And ripgrep is a blazing fast version of grep that's written in Rust, and so it is just blistering fast. Okay, that's that. Here ends our Vim sidebar for the night. Let's check on this enrollment stuff and see if the enrollment has the necessary. Okay, great. Question's already answered. So let's search. There's only one place where this little private method is called. Here's the enrollment, and you can see that it's doing a select related on student. So we can have some confidence that this to do is efficient. One down. That was the easy one. Okay, let's go to here. This student's view that's unrelated to this thing that we're working on tonight. So we'll skip that to do. I said I try to keep my to-dos out of the project, but that's for some like other issues that I still have open that I just haven't had time to fix. Okay. This one is also another one that's related to a different issue. And I don't think that we can write this test yet because we're not making the actual model change this evening that's going to make this work. What we're trying to do is just plumb through the student so that when we do make the model change and do add the necessary break filtering that does work on students, that it'll just all work. And so I don't think we can write that. So those first three are out. Yes, yeah, we do homeschooling for my kids. They've been doing it for a couple of years. So my wife is the primary educator in our home, and she had the whole reason that this whole project came about because she had a previous service that she was using. She liked certain aspects of it, like frankly, I copied certain aspects of the previous service, which was like the dynamic schedule building of like, we're just going to fill up your schedule with what's available. She liked that aspect, but there were things about it that were super clunky. It was made by another software developer whose kids also did homeschooling, but it was done probably like 20 years ago at this point. So you can imagine the kind of web design qualities that it had. And it also had like the security certificates were expired. So basically like all of this data was being collected and could be intercepted and stuff. It had a bunch of like things that were like, okay, there's probably good reason not to use this anymore. So I created this as something for her directly that kind of took the best features of that other service and then had an idea in mind to make it available to others, which is how I got on this path and how I walked through explaining this SaaS product to all of you. Yeah, it is a good reason to do some coding, to know that it's directly helping my family is pretty awesome. Okay, so let's see. We're not going to address this to-do because it's something else. We're not going to write the test. This other to-do is something else. And this to-do is the one where we're not actually going to populate this yet. So I don't think we have to do any of those top 4 to-dos. Here is where we need to get to, is student needed? And this is one of the first ones. And I think the answer is going to be yes, which is a bummer. So what are we looking at? We're looking at the school year. And we're looking at this thing that calculates the next course day. Yeah, it's definitely going to be student dependent. Or, well, is it? Yeah, it is. Okay, shoot. So the idea behind this is that there are times in the scheduling where we have to look ahead, like when is the next time this course runs? And courses in this app, they don't have to run on any particular given day of the week. You can actually turn them all off if you want. You could have a class that runs on Monday. You could have a class that runs 5 days a week. You could have a class that runs Tuesday, Thursday, like whatever. You get the idea. And sometimes, like, the schedule has to look ahead. So another aspect that was really important to her is this ability to look into the future and do a calculation on what is coming up. And that is actually, so like this page right here is probably the single hardest page on the app, getting this right. Accounting for what has been done, what has not been done, when should things be moved ahead. Like getting this particular thing right is like the crown jewel of this application, because it is really hard to get this logic just so, and it just is, it's where all the work has gone, and it's actually a really complicated method. Sadly, this method right here is one of those in that big scheduling calculator, and getting that course day is going to be important per student, and so we need to be able to factor in that student in this part. So let's go up the tree and see where this is used and see when we can finally get access to the student. It looks like it's used in the forecaster. So the definition is here. That's what we were just looking at. And it's used in the forecaster. The forecaster is what does all the scheduling logic. And then there's some tests. Okay, thankfully, this is good news. Like, we already have a student available for this one. Is the student available here? With any luck, the student will just be available for all these and we can pass it through. Yep, student's available in the second one. And then it's all the same method. Okay, great. Student is available in all circumstances. So what we can do, why don't we actually go to the definition here and change this so that student is required here, and then we'll come back. Yeah, we'll come back. So next course day, get the next course day after the provided day. So I kind of want to, so these two are critical. Like this is the pairing, the course and the day are really what matters. Like it's this particular course that you care about, and this is, you want to find it after this day. So the student is just kind of this extra information that just happens to be a requirement. And so if we do that, we now have it there, and then we can change the is break here to take the student. Okay. And that is going to cause this code. I save this file. Really? I figured for sure that this would blow up in my face saying like, hey, wait a minute, this is not having not enough arguments. If only we could be so lucky. Okay, let's just put it in though. We know we need it. Let's put it there. And we have it here. So we want to put it, pass it in there. And then there's one more. And so don't worry about all, like, there's just a lot of stuff here, and if I took the time to explain all of this tree, we'd be here all night or all day. And some of you are on the other side of the world. So, okay, let's see how we're doing though. I don't know how many tests. I should have actually come back and run the test suite after we fixed that other spot in the models that was breaking. Cross our fingers. All the tests should pass. Even this new area. No. There are going to be 3 tests that'll fail. There they are. Okay. So there were a handful of tests that actually, like, there was the test for this method itself. So we need a student here. And, well, that's a bummer because we need... Oh, you know what though? I'm going to try and punt on this. Can I do that? Can we say student is none? I think I can get away with this. I don't know if it's the best decision to do that. What? Oh, shoot. All right. Can't run tests from within my editor because I forgot to turn on. Get out of here. Forgot to turn on my virtual environment. All right. Back to where we were. Let's just run the test suite over here again. Takes a little bit, but it's not too bad. I should just run the file, but I don't remember what file it was that it was in. Okay, we're looking good. Now, let's go to our next to-do. This is the other part of that I'm not crazy about. I don't know if there's some option with rip grep that I'm missing, but you might have noticed this too if you're being super observant. I wouldn't blame you if you're not though. Is that if I search for this multiple times, see what's happening? The sort order is not deterministic. I don't know why. A rip grep is crazy fast, but I think it makes some trade-offs for that speed. If you study the way that like grep programs work, they do not parse data the way that you might think they might. Like probably the human brain, the logical conclusion that you might jump to is that it's scanning like line by line with this stuff. But the way a lot of these things work is they actually just slurp in huge chunks of memory all at once and then scan over that in very clever ways. That I think that affects like how the sort order works and some of these things. I'm not the author of RipGrep though, so I could be way off base. But I think I've looked into this before. Like, can we have a stable sort order? And I think the answer was no. I should check on that in the future. So I got to like look at this list, and the fact that I have those other to-dos in this list is means I need to figure out which ones were the ones that we said we could skip. They're no longer at the top. All right, let's return. Nope, that was one that we said we could get away with not doing. All right, so we've got next course day. We have that student is pushed through the system. And then we needed to do this get task count in range. This one, this one gets used a lot. And this one has been, I've come back to this method so many times thinking, is this wrong? Because this is, whenever I'm getting the scheduling logic wrong, it usually comes down to here. And it has to do with what this is used for. It's used for determining an index. So the way that the week scheduling is done to look ahead and look into the future is I take a table of tasks that's in Postgres, and I filter out all of the ones that already are done. won't get into what done looks like or how that is, but I just know that I set them aside. And from that list of remaining tasks, then I have to calculate an index that looks ahead of like how many school days are there between the current date when the user cares about and that date in the future. As I said, this is like the crown jewel logic, so this is why it's complicated. And that calculation involves figuring out this index to look into and grab the right records from the table. And okay, cool. So it would go a little slower, but I could have a stable sort. Might be worthwhile trade-off. I'll try that experiment. Thanks for looking that up, Raviskar. So this get task count in range thing, this is the thing that does the index calculation. It's really important that I get this right. And there have been so many times where I'm like, I come into this method to say, is this method right? Every time I walk away with this method is the right one. It's the stuff that's right above it, though, that tends to be wrong. So I'm hesitant here, but I think there's nothing we can do about it. In terms of parameter order, I think it's still right to say we care about the course. This is the course that we want to get the task count for, and we need to get it for a certain start and end range. So I think that student needs to belong at the end here. So let's go ahead and just add student and just assume that it's going to be possible to get, and then change this student aspect here. So now that we have, so the actual work in this method is, as you can see, pretty trivial. Like there's nothing that really needs to change on this aspect. But we need to go into, so the tests are going to break. So there's immediately I can see 2 tests that'll break in the test models. But we need to go where this place is called and make sure that we can pass in the student for all these spots. Looks like it's in the student's models, which means that the thing that we probably need is going to be self, which is good because it should be an actual instance of a student. So let's go to the first one, and that should be here. Get course tasks, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, we're in the student model, right? Yep, okay. So we should be able to fix by adding self. That is the student record. Same here. And same here. Oh, man. Doesn't that look odd? How many times do you see self at the end of an argument list? It looks strange to me, but it's right. It's the student. Okay, let's prove that this is going to blow up. We have 2 failures. Yep. And here's the one. This one doesn't have a student in the test, so I think we can get away with like this, student equal none. Because again, remember, the underlying method all this is going to use is going to work with none. So I think this is okay. We probably want another test that actually works with the student in the future. Maybe. Or just trust that the isBreak method that when we write the test right here, actually, when we write this test, that anything that uses isBreak will be appropriate, because I have test coverage for when it is none, and test coverage for, I will have test coverage for when it has a value. All right, where was I? The other test that needs it is this guy right here. And we, again, do not have a student available to us. We'll just say student equal none. Oops. And run the test for this file again, and all should pass. All right, we're chipping away, getting there. Let me think for a minute if we want to continue, or if this is like a, again, I said I didn't want to subject you all to all of this, but I'm just thinking on this for a minute. Is there one that's more valuable than the others, or is it just going to be more of the same? I think it's going to be more of the same. So I think this is maybe a decent time to stop, unless you all have questions. Like if you have questions or you want to see something specific, let me know in the chat. I'm happy to chat through them. And what we'll do is we'll take a couple minutes to talk about what is next after this and what I have looking a little bit beyond that. So once this is done, once the API is resolved to actually like have student in all the places that need it, and when connecting the dots so the student is there, then we can go back to that issue, and we can add this many-to-many table that does the lookups. And so really where this is going to matter, where this is going to play out, in fact, let's take a look at that real quick. It's the schools models, and it's going to probably play out mostly in this method right here. And in fact, this is not going to work long term. Like there's going to be something else that has to go on here. Or this might actually be one method. We're going to have to insert a method between. So this property is useful in that it's looking through all the breaks, but we're going to basically need to change the all to be a filter that looks for the school breaks that don't have any many-to-many records associated with it. So that's going to be a school break that just applies to all the students. And then school breaks that do have the many-to-many, because that'll be specific to that student. I'll get to your question or your comment there in just a second, Raviskar. So we're going to have to insert a layer between, and that layer, like right now, this get break is doing a lookup on a single dictionary. But I think what I want to do, because it's not going to be too much extra work, is to have 2 levels of dictionaries. So one will be saying like use the student as the key into another cache. So they're in a call, in a request, this query that is building out the set of breaks. The break set will be different per student, right? So my son, my daughter, they might be on different field trips. They could have different sets of breaks. And if we're displaying the daily or weekly view, which will be a very common activity that shows all the students, then I'm going to have to do this query anyway. So I guess there's actually multiple approaches that we could take. One approach could be say, get me all of the school breaks for the entire school year, and then from that I can parse it out and segment like which are particular to my son, which are particular to my daughter, and generalize this to just students in general. But I'm trying to give you something concrete to grab onto, and then have those lists, and then we can use that student attribute that will be passed in. The student argument that is passed in, and then do the segmentation properly. So that's probably where the core of this logical change has to be. All right, let me get to your comment now, Rafiskar. Yeah, curious about my approach for updating new tests. Some of it is like the places where right now, so if I look at this, I haven't committed anything yet, and we've only really touched this single file. What will likely happen offline is I will go back in here and I will either add a new test as a variant of that includes the student filtering to kind of indicate that there are the presence of a student or not indicates a behavioral change that can happen, right? Like there is something different that can happen or not for some of those things that are considered like public methods. And that is kind of the logic process I have of, does there need to be a test there? So anytime you have a kind of a new option, that might be a case for a good unit test. However, as I noted, I will have a test for specifically for that isBreak method. So really what is most important is that I test the isBreak. If the other methods that I have that have added that student parameter, if the only thing that they're doing is passing along that isBreak, then I question how much value I'm adding by adding a test specifically for students there. Because if you think about it, those kind of tests, what they would ultimately be doing is repeating the logical check, because it would be setting up the same kind of conditions that I'd care about. It was like, what is the student causing to change the task count? Well, it's really the only way it's affecting the task count is by whether there's a break for that student or not. And if I already trust the isBreak method, then having a test to also test that behavior, it's just like testing from a distance, and it's not as helpful. So the change on that lowest level method is critically important in this process. Maintaining 100% coverage is important here, but like I'm not adding new conditionals and new branches. So there's actually not a lot of like new tests that I think I have to write. So in all likelihood, I might write like another test that integrates with that isBreak method, just to. I'm not sure. I'm not sold if I have to do that or not. Certainly we'll test isBreak and the different variants there. I hope that kind of answers your question there. I think the benefit I have is that I already have 100% test coverage, so I'm as confident in the suite as I can be. That's one of the nice parts about like setting that crazy high bar is sometimes it sucks. sometimes I really don't want to have 100% test coverage because it's a pain to get all these conditions. But then you get these benefits like this kind of refactoring stuff here tonight. This is when 100% test coverage, in my opinion, like really pays off. What gives me the confidence that yeah, you're right. That's true. That kind of gets into that whole discussion about like when is it semantically matter versus not matter, and maybe that's an excellent point, that perhaps there's a reason to have a test there to document that, like, hey, this matters. Like, you need a student here because this code surrounding it cares. So thank you. I hadn't really thought about that. TCK3, yeah, 100% test coverage for services. Like, is there more to that question? Because if I run, I have a command, like we can see it here. So this thing will run, and this is going to be the coverage run. And in theory, I don't think I added any, like, we added a new argument, no new branches, as I said. So this should report back 100% coverage on this unit test suite. Yeah, how long has this project been in the making? And thank you for the kind words, Shivans. I'm really appreciative. I've been working on this. Well, when did I cut code? We can answer this. Let's go take a look. Sometimes I don't, or this race through the GitHub API is going to take forever. Hold on. Let's get out of here. And first commit should be at the bottom of this. Initial commit was made November 4th of 2019. So I've been working on it like a year and a half, I guess. And I had been thinking about it a little bit before that too. So this is about the time when my wife was using the old app. So timeline is like, we'd been doing homeschool for my son initially. My daughter was in preschool at the time. And yeah, she was probably a few months into it and using this other app and starting to get frustrated with it. And I started to see the opportunity of like making something better. So that. Oh, I see. I see your comment there, TCK3. Like, what do I consider 100% coverage? That's an astute observation. Like, I am testing. Well, maybe it's better stated up. What am I not testing? So you can see I've got 100% coverage here, but there are definitely things I'm not testing. And the things that I'm not testing, I don't test JavaScript. I should probably, but like I'm using, in this project, I'm using HTMX. And where's a place where that exists? There's a couple of places where I'm using HTMX, which is a pretty cool tool. Here's one. And there's a bunch of template logic that I probably could or should test. But I've made a calculated decision here not to do it. And the reason is, in my thinking, and this is maybe misguided, is that I am always testing these UI changes every time I'm going in there and poking on the user interface every time. And so there's a trade-off of like how much value add am I going to get out of a UI test, knowing that they tend to be the most brittle. Now, what I'm risking by making that decision is that what happens if I update HTMX and I update it to a version and I don't, like I would now have to manually go test every spot that I did it, that I used HTMX to confirm that the behavior still exists. And that's a risk. That is like definitely some place where my app could break because I'm not going through all the layers. So to answer your question about like what layers am I testing, I do quite a lot of like unit tests where I can. So like if I test model methods, you will see me like get down to that level. I will also have a lot of what can I show you? Core. So I will have tests of views where I will run through, or I'll use something like Django Test Plus, and some of these are really simple tests. They're basically checking like, do you get a 200 response? In other words, does it exercise enough of the code to go through all of the Django machinery and come out the other side with a proper 200 response that would show up in the browser? That's obviously, it's not checking the content of those things. Like, you know, I'm not doing anything to check my privacy policy, that the privacy policy is right, or that I'm rendering the right template. So there's an argument to be said that I could be doing more here. But this is kind of my personal trade-off of what did I think, as someone who is running the project as an individual, what did I think was going to have the most value for me? So hopefully that kind of gets to like what layers I'm going with. So I kind of view it as two things. I view my view tests as more of my integration style, and they are doing template rendering. So if I screw up my templates and forget a closing tag and my templates explode, it will catch those. What it's not going to catch is I don't do a lot of like assertion on the content of the rendered stuff. So if I rendered something wrong, or if I have something like visual artifacts, none of that stuff. I don't do any of kind of like UI testing to that level to ensure that the pages stay the same as they were when I first wrote them. And yeah, that, like I said, that's a balancing point that I had to consider. Yeah, 40 tests for certain files. Yeah, there are some that. And there's some of these tests that they get much longer than I would like. In fact, like this particular, like I think this one right here, this test has schedules, is probably the gnarliest test in all of my test suite, because this core view has to set up a lot of data to accurately reflect anything, and then I'm asserting a lot on the context. And I guess it's not that bad when you step away from it, I suppose. But it's still quite a bit to set it up, and I would have to, like, if I ever had to return to this test or broke something, I'd have to be like, why did I do this again? Why did I set this up this way? Like, why is it just these? Why is Tuesday not in the list of course days? Like, there's things in here that when you write your test, try and be kind to yourself and include information. Or that's why I definitely encourage, like, if you have tests, these are probably my worst tests these days, because I learned that over time, as a solo developer, even though I wrote all this code, I forget what I wrote and I forget why I wrote something. So I've been much, much better these days about writing documentation strings for my tests. Say like, what are you trying to test here? And that's been a helpful breadcrumbs to get back. Do I have much experience with Django REST Framework? I have a ton of experience with Django REST Framework. Ironically, this app doesn't use it at all, but I use it extensively at work. So I'm happy to answer questions. Because of the way I chose to do this app, from past experience with previous SaaS projects where I tried with DRF and realized that as a single person working on an app, making an API was way overkill because I didn't need a full SPA for my projects. So I know all about the way DRF works. I was once upon a time a maintainer of a DRF extension, so I'm pretty familiar with the internal workings of it. So if you have got questions in the future, Shivans, about DRF that you want to ask about, I'll happily try to answer them. Good question. Was 100% coverage worth it? Yes and no. Like, if I thought that School Desk was going to be some runaway successful project that was like could potentially become a job, like and supplant my full-time job, then no. You know, I sacrificed certain speed elements by achieving this 100% test coverage, but I was never under any illusion that I was going to make this my full-time job. My goal with this was to satisfy a single customer, that is my wife. And then after that, if I could make something useful for other people because I care about my wife and I'm going to make something good for her, then like it's a byproduct. So and that's happened. Like there have been other people who said that really helps me, and I'm grateful for that. But that is where 100% test coverage has actually started to pay off. It's like I was willing to go slower, and my wife was willing to tolerate some rough edges for a while and put up with that. And the payoff is that, you know, I think what I say, like 18 months or something, you know, this project started at the end of 2019. So I guess maybe more than that at this point. So even though it's been slow and I only have a handful of like real customers, I think I'm happy with where I'm at. So good question. Yeah, getting back to like API stuff, the reason that Dr. On Demand does it is as absolutely as you described. So my employer, you know, I can speak for my employer in a sense of like I know the technology, but keep in mind like I'm not representing the company here, so these are just my opinions. But they're not bad opinions. So Dr. On Demand has an Android client and an iOS client and web clients, and we keep a pretty strict separation between the back end of the system that provides all the data and a lot of the business logic, and all of these clients are consumers of that. And in that model, yeah, with a team size that we're about 100 engineers, and my company just merged with another one, so the calculus gets a little funny on how big engineering is these days. But if you look at the historical Dr. On Demand team size, 100 is it's about the answer, and that's including. That's not just, don't think of that's like 100 Python engineers. It's not. It's like mobile engineers, quality assurance, release management, test on like system automation testing. And there's a bunch of groups in there that represent that final number. But all of those people working together, the only way to really scale that level of effort, or I think the only way to really scale that level of effort is to focus on interfaces. And interfaces, the easiest interface that we can all kind of coalesce around is, for a website anyway, is HTTP and APIs. Yeah, making an app with your friend, like if you pick Django REST Framework, it's a really solid choice. Like I think there are so many cool things about DRF that I think are awesome. Do I have it here? Yeah. Like even just the documentation is great, but I love like this API guide alone, this whole section highlights all the stuff that I think so many people forget about that go into good APIs. And the fact that there are answers for all of, and what I'm talking about is like, okay, the top is very DRF specific, but once you get down to about here, about halfway through, this is like stuff that any API, not just a Django API, but like a Flask API or APIs written in Go or, like whatever. If you're using HTTP and writing kind of RESTful APIs, these are topics that matter at a certain size. Your ability to do caching, throttling, filtering, pagination, versioning, like this stuff matters if you want to make something that is broadly applicable and consumable by a large audience. Maybe that's not where you're at with your project with your friend, but you never know the future. And the fact that there are answers within this framework that can address a lot of these things makes this tool really powerful. REST framework is not perfect. I think even like Tom Christie, the original author, will be the first to highlight that it's not perfect. It has quirks to it, just like anything else, but it's a really solid project. How many hours have I invested into the app overall, and how many were for the test suite? Let's see. I think it depends. That's a crummy answer. I'm sorry. That's probably not the answer you may want to hear. So lately, the only real time I'm spending on this homeschool app is when I'm streaming. So this time that you see right now is vastly the lion's share of it. And I might, like I said, I might go do a little bit offline, but it's really going to be maybe an hour or two offline in a whole week. I'm not investing a ton of time into it. And some of that, we have to measure. So we can be talking about many things here. There is software development time, and that is something that when I first created the app and was really hitting it hard, because what I wanted to do was get my wife interested enough. So my last application, my last SaaS app that I built, I actually, again, it was something for my wife. She used to be a college consultant and helped students pick their colleges and SAT prep, ACT, all these things related to college selection. And I thought I'd built something for her, but I went too slow. And she gave up on me, rightfully so. I didn't move fast enough. I didn't deliver something because I got too into the technology and too focused on building what I thought was like a perfect product. And she was gone. And I knew that this time around, I did not want that to happen. So early on, I pushed hard. Like I was working on it like every night, multiple hours, trying to like get the core of the schedule working, get it to a point where she'd be like, yep, I can use that. And even then, it took weeks and weeks and weeks of like refining it before she's like, okay, this is good. And I think it wasn't even until my family runs our school year on the calendar year. So we ended 2019. I think it was 2019. We ended a year before she was willing to try out the app. And I even made like importers to go from the previous tool, and like I had to get like realistic data that was representative, because we wanted to do a side-by-side comparison of, this old tool that she's using says it's this schedule. Does my tool match? Did I get it right? So what I was doing was I wrote like a little like scraper script that would literally log into her account, pull down all the data for my kids. Their exporter format was just horrible, so I had to like do a bunch of weird stuff to like ingest this data, and I could iterate really quickly on having real data that she had already inserted in this other tool. And the thought process was like, well, maybe I'll actually at some point have her transition over mid-school year and import her data, and she'd be off to the races. That didn't end up happening, but it ended up like being a really good tool for me to build out the initial part. And so when she really did start, it was from a clean slate for the new school year. So that's kind of like the initial investment for development time. Since then, like the app is what I end up showing you all is a lot of code stuff, because frankly, I think that's probably what you're interested in. Like you're probably on Twitch because you're interested in seeing code stuff. That's what I imagine. But you can call me wrong on that. But there are a lot of other things that I do in this. Like I try and I turned the thing off, but we actually go to the real school, the real site. So this is the real application, and there's a lot of stuff that's in here about a product blog to like show things that I do. There's a lot of there's documentation. So I have a whole like set of docs that I've built up and written to guide users directly. There is, if you go to the project and look at the issues list, you can actually see that the dominant thing here is market research. So I don't cover any of the marketing that I'm doing of competitors. Like I have some work set aside to go and analyze each of the competitors that are out there, and there are lots of them, and figure out what their benefits are, and write up a review and post it on a forum that I'm a part of to like be engaged with the homeschool community and like actually get some people, get some eyeballs. Because the only way to get any traction, the way I've got customers, is I went to where the people are, and I like became a member of that community and tried to offer, silly guidance where I could. Like I'm not a homeschooler myself, but I'm the father of homeschooled children, and I am a technologist. So, there were things that I see pop up in the forums that were like, how can I answer, programming questions? Like anytime somebody's asked, like, what's a good way to teach your kids programming? Like that's something where obviously I have tons of experience and can jump in and answer. So this is the half of, and I probably would say it's about half of the time that I spend on this project that has nothing to do with software development per se. But I end up writing documentation about this stuff, doing comparisons. Like you can go read, I've looked at a bunch of these tools and talked about what, done some analysis of what's the benefit. And I think that all of this stuff goes into helping users make their decision. When it comes time to decide, well, do I actually want to try this thing? Is this worth it? Anytime I can kind of link these things, then it starts to dig that moat. I don't know if you all have heard that phrasing before, but like with your SaaS product or any project that you want to work on that you need to have competitive advantage or something, you want to dig a moat, like a castle moat kind of thing. And if you make it deep and wide, then like you're going to have better protection is the idea, right? When you think about castles and stuff. So this phrase is sometimes used to say, like, what are you doing to differentiate yourself and make your product stand out? And so here's kind of some of the efforts that I'm doing. And I don't do nearly enough of this. This should be really clear. Like I could do a ton more. All right, I kind of beat that question to death. So let me get to some of the others here. Do people use Go as an alternative? Yes, is the short answer. Yeah, I can't get too much into the details of what my company is doing, but we are, in our merger, we have Go as one of the technologies in our stack. And their Go is really fast. In fact, I was looking at this today. I was trying to be like, how fast is it? So if you look at the site Tech Empower, this is a pretty cool little website that is informative about a lot of stuff, but it's the Tech Empower benchmarks. And they take a lot of really popular frameworks and compare them. And they compare lots of different languages. Apparently it's remembering a previous version that I looked at had a bunch of stuff in it. And you can come in here and you can see, how does my stuff stack up? Now, I will say, like, this is going to bias towards certain aspects, like performance. This is about benchmarking. So this is very much like a performance and latency focused site. So you can pop in here and you could say Python, and you could say Go, and perhaps, I don't know, PHP are going to be common choices, you can see all of the frameworks that still applies to, because there are tons. And you can apply it, and you can get a list of what are the scores on these sites. Like how did this do, like at this multiple queries test? And you get these numbers of what comes out on top. How's this stuff do? And this is pretty interesting if you want to like look at, well, how does Go stack up? And if you compare it to Python, and at least from a performance perspective, it stacks up really well, which is great for Go. Now, I still think Go is, it's not, there's good qualities about Go. There are things about it that drive me absolute batty, like the way they do error handling, and there's a lot of boilerplate there that maybe there are other ways around it. I'm not an experienced Go developer, when I read through at one point read through the Go tutorials, Go manual, some level of their documentation, and saw their error handling, where it's like a lot of they'll return an error value, and you always have to check it before moving on. They don't really do exception handling, and it's a different style. So there's trade-offs of like, what do you, when you look at the code, what do you think of it? Do you like how it feels? Do you like how it works? If you do, great. Like you could get really far with using Go, and it's a popular choice. There are other factors that I would consider, and the reason why I still am a big fan of Python is you look at the market for it, you look at what it's being used for. Python is this really powerful language that is used for tons of use cases, right? And from data science to web stuff to cloud infrastructure to all these different areas. And I think that makes it on its own very interesting. So some of these more specific languages like Go, the Go can be used for general stuff, but it doesn't necessarily get used for that. Like I wouldn't say, if I said data science, what languages would pop into your head? The top one for most people is probably Python. And then the ones that pop into that, are Julia is probably another one. Scala is another. So these are the ones that there are a handful that are there. But why is Python in the list? It's interesting to me that Python appears in that list. I'm not familiar with Octave. That's an interesting one. But yeah, you all know it. You've got the list, the top players down in your heads. But it's interesting. It's interesting to me that Python, which is this fairly generic language, comes to mind there. Like, why is that? And there's a bunch of reasons, but it's really popular in the science world. And I think that Octave, interesting, open source version of MATLAB, fascinating. But I think that we have evidence that the community is a big aspect of Python. And while Go is great for certain cloud stuff, it's more niche. Like it's definitely a narrower focus of what it's generally applied for. Could you write data science stuff in Go? Absolutely. Nothing says you couldn't. Is the community and packages and all the stuff that you'd want to have going to be there? Maybe. I don't know. I've not done any research, so keeping me honest, like I that could be the case, but I don't think it is. So I think all of this stuff like factors into language choices as when you're designing systems of what is the story that you want to be having. And if it's like, I'm going to be building this big data science tool, have a big data science team, and yet have to be in that code and also making web stuff, well, it's kind of nice to not have to have a ton of different languages to know. And maybe your experience and your knowledge allow you to work in a lot of different languages, and if so, that's cool. But as I think about it, and if I was designing a team, I would try to optimize for not having a huge polyglot organization, because what I've found in my position is that it kind of thins out who's available to work on things, and it limits your talent pool. And also just looking at like the market, what Python developers are available is is another thing to consider. Is like what Go developers are available. You can find them, but how many of them are there? How many of them are available? Like, it's a pretty competitive market out there. All right, let's get. What was this other question? There's another question up there. Do I have lots of admin and working with users? At this stage, no. I've got a handful of users. They've been pretty happy. I've actually reached out to them directly to get their feedback, and they've been very willing to say like, hey, here's what I like. And so actually looking at my issues list, so some of these top issues that are here are related to things that I got as responses from some of my customers. So it's populating the list of things that I can build for my product to continue to dig that moat, and getting that feedback is really pretty critical. I'm sure someday if I scaled this out and had a lot more customers, then I imagine there would be a higher burden on admin kind of stuff and support ticket kind of stuff. The setting a product that has like required payment and not being a freeware version kind of thing, or a freemium, freeware is not the right word, freemium model sets the bar high enough that you get a certain caliber of user out of the equation that is just kind of a leech on your time and your life. No knock against people who want to go with a freemium model, but I chose not to because I wanted to set that bar at that level. Do I think ethics is a big thing in programming? I wish it was more of a thing. And the second half of your question is, and my job. For my job, absolutely. Like, I work at a healthcare company. We have legal requirements to comply with HIPAA, the healthcare laws in the US. And that's a really important company value, is that we, the company value, and I'm going to get a little preachy at you, I guess, and I apologize, is that the company value is like putting patients first. That's the one of the ones that is hammered into us as we come to work at Dr. On Demand. And for me, not only does that mean providing like good patient care, it means like obeying the law and making sure that we have the right security controls in place and that we're doing right by privacy with healthcare data, because we're being entrusted with the data of a lot of people who are coming to us with like their medical problems, and their medical history is then tracked in the app. And so I think that the ethics is a really important part of that. And I personally would not work at a company that's willing to like push those lines. Like, that's not my personal style. It's not my upbringing. I've always been taught to be very ethical in my behavior, and so I'm happy to work at a place that cares about that stuff. All right. So what do we got here? Yep, I definitely like to use issues and milestones for my project management for my local project. I try not to be in a lot of different tools. I think it just helps to be that GitHub has a bunch of things to offer, so it keeps it simple for me for this project. And what about my role in defense work? Yes, good question. That is an interesting line to walk, right? Because on the one hand, I do think national defense is an important thing. Like, I think a nation should protect its citizens, but there's like all this stuff of how far does that extend? And for my part at Lockheed Martin, to be like, I was never one to work on missiles or work on, like instruments of death. I'll say that I don't know what I would have done if it was like I had to work on one of those contracts. I guess the closest thing I was working on a tool that got ultimately used for the F-35 So like a configuration management tool, so a source control kind of tool, an issue tracker kind of tool that was internally used by Lockheed Martin. So F-35 from a distance. But primarily when I was there, I worked on satellite software, so communication software. So my first job out of college was at Lockheed, and worked on the GPS contract. So there was a modernization effort. So when the GPS satellites go overhead, they ultimately, at different points, as they're in their orbit, communicate with ground stations. And these ground stations are that's the software area that I worked on. So the ground stations, what they do is they send up different like flight plans, and like there's a bunch of data that goes up to the satellites. And to be very clear, all this is unclassified. There's nothing classified about any of this work. And it's stuff that, like orbital trajectories, for example. The satellites to stay in their proper orbit to make sure that they're operating correctly is it's important to maintain that orbit, and they have to do what's called a delta V, so those changes in positioning, little adjustments to stay in that orbit. But to know what those changes are requires a lot of computation. And you can imagine the satellites that are up there, they want to minimize the energy that they use because they want to be up there as long as possible. So the way that a lot of that is handled is the computation for those orbital adjustments and stuff are done on the ground with very strong computers that can do all this computation and then basically give the results up to the satellite and just kind of load them up from these ground stations. So that's an example of why we have ground stations, to help keep the birds. We call them, the satellites are called birds for some reason. Keep the birds in orbit, keep them positioned so that they're not flipping around and burning up their solar arrays and all like there's all sorts of stuff that has to go into making it work. It was a fascinating project. I got to work with some really interesting people. Like there's things that you may not consider. Like I don't know how many of you have actually thought about GPS before. I probably had not thought about it a lot before I started working that contract. But the way it works is by figuring out, it's all about clocks and timing. So we measure from multiple satellites. It takes at least 2 positions to figure out where you are. And you can think of it, and I apologize if you're all like getting bored of me just kind of rambling on now. This is sort of a fun walk down memory lane. GPS can figure out your position by figuring out your distance from where you are to the satellite itself. And it does that by sending an electromagnetic radiation, just EM signal, and figuring out the time between those two things. And to do that calculation, the speed of light, you might think like, well, this is electromagnetic radiation, it's speed of light stuff, right? Well, there's all these like layers that that the light has to travel through in order to get from you to the satellite. Like the atmosphere has just stuff going on. So there were entire scientists that their entire job was to figure out all of the computation, that how long does it take that signal to get from your device up to the satellite. And all of that variance in the different layers of the atmosphere are going to adjust the speed of light at these different spots. And that's important to get right, because if you don't, then all your calculations wrong. So why does this matter? The time. All right. So if you know the time and we know the speed of light, and like we can measure the time distance between your device and the one up there, then you can calculate how far away that is, like at a distance level, and that gives you one data point. And so you think of the satellite. Think of it as a sphere. All that the satellite then knows is that you are a point on that sphere, that distance away. So in order to calculate your position, so that sphere would be like anywhere in space, all around it, anywhere in a number of places on the Earth. So to actually figure out your position, we need a second satellite. And the second satellite we'll also do the same thing, calculate another sphere. And so now you're thinking three-dimensionally, and you think about where those two spheres are going to intersect. And if you think about that intersection, it's actually a plane, right? Or it's even more than a plane. It's just a circle. So if you, I can't diagram this really well. I apologize. But just think about how two circles might intersect. At that intersection point, sorry, just jam my microphone. At that intersection point is a line, is a circle. The circle, if you were to analyze it, it would have one point touching the ground, and then I think it's like 1 point in space or 1 point somewhere in the earth, something like that is usually how it works out. So we can very quickly figure out which one is on the surface of the earth or not. So it's possible with like just two satellites to figure out kind of where you are on Earth. But it's really critically important to do all that computation. So I didn't work on any of that stuff. I just being really, really clear. I just worked with some really smart people who spent tons of time thinking about, like, these were like world-renowned scientists that were working down the hall for me. That's really strange. My job was much more lowly, so I was testing the ground control software. So we were taking it from an old mainframe, that's what the original one was on, and modernizing it is relative here, to Solaris 8, I think it was. So it's basically a version of Unix that was within the last 20 years at the time. So we had to do the testing, because you can't flub this. You can't like say, okay, we got the mainframe, we got the software conversion wrong, and we crashed all the GPS satellites. That would be really bad news. So this project has years and years of testing going on, and I started out as one of these integration testers. So I would get little components of this ground control software and have a big gigantic test plan that had to go verify the different requirements that the Air Force had put forth. And it's really interesting because even the testing would happen in such a way that, like, we weren't, we were talking about testing earlier, and I was talking about like UI testing. Well, this level of testing, this level of integration testing was like literally talking to real satellites in the sky. So we would get the opportunity to, like, when the satellites weren't in operation for other stuff, and this was a very coordinated schedule. There was a whole person whose job was to find slices of time that we could test against these certain satellites. And we would test this ground control software against the real satellites, the real birds, to measure, like, was it working right? Is the software working appropriately? Did we see all this data correctly? And so that did mean that, like, I had some weird test schedules and where I'd have to come in at like weird times of day, and I didn't have to do a lot of night shifts. There was an occasional like one or two, but there were some people on my team that they just like they worked at all weird hours of the day just because they had to test against certain satellites, and that was just their job, and they loved it. Anyway, that was my job with my first job coming out of college, which was quite an experience. I still remember. So you all see me work on Vim today. My first day on coming out of that job, my I guess mentor, I don't know if that's the right word, the person who was assigned to teach me the ropes, she plopped me down and logged me into Solaris and said, hey, type VI and like one of these help files, a TXT file. And I did that, and she said, okay, now read all these and learn as much as you can about the system. And then she walked away. And the hilarious part to me is I had never done any stuff with VI before. So I think she was trolling me. And because I remember, like, oh, well, I can go up and down, right? And then I tried to type something in and like nothing worked. And I was very, very puzzled. And nobody had told me like what VI was. And I started doing research on other computers and realized, oh man, what have I gotten into? So that was my first gig. It was fun. But so outside of that, I worked on other satellite systems at Lockheed, and generally, I think they were for a positive benefit of communication stuff. So I didn't feel like I had any ethical quandaries with any of that. What sort of protocols do they use to send data back and forth for satellites? Well, I wish I could tell you. I don't remember. I just don't remember. It's been too long ago. Okay, go ahead. I'll get $1 later. Talking to my wife. I gotta get $1 for my daughter for the tooth fairy. I'll be right back. Yeah, rookie hazing with VI. I wish I could. Yeah, well, I don't know if I wish that. I was gonna say I wish I could get away with that kind of thing with like new hires today, but they have VS Code and know better. Anyway, those are some stories, random stories of my initial time as a software developer. I think I'm looking at the time where we're running at like 2 hours. I do appreciate y'all joining in. It's been fun chatting, and I'm always happy to like chat about random stuff that has nothing to do with SaaS if you're interested. I'm going to take this content as always and post up on YouTube. So if there's anything if you came in later and you want to refer back to, you're welcome to do so. Next time, I'm hoping to have a little bit more work done, have this student filled out through all of the different APIs that we just talked through, and then we'll move on to the next thing. Maybe we'll try and like do the actual modeling to get the new data in there, and think through the implications of that, because there are going to be implications of like, what am I going to have to do? For example, we have to solve, what do we do about existing data on school breaks over there? Like, what do we have to do? I don't know. Anyway, thanks so much for your time tonight, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening or day. Take care.